Matter of Reclaim the Records versus New York State Department of Health, and we are joined, and delighted to be joined by our colleague, Justice Manuel Mendez from the First Department.
Thank you.
May it please the court, Michael Moritz on behalf of Reclaim the Records. I'd like to reserve 3 minutes.
Yes.
Your Honor, Reclaim the Records is looking for basic biographical.
Counsel, could you clarify for me exactly at this stage what you're looking for? So if we look at the 3 groups of records, right? So say pre-57, 57, 72, 72 basically to the present. Accurate that pre-57 we're not concerned with in this appeal?
Pre-57, we're only concerned to the extent that the Department of Health has other records that they haven't yet produced. Because their only argument pre-57 to withhold records is saying that we've given you the index. But the whole concept here is what they're claiming is the index is not actually what their own catalog.
Well, what did you ask for?
We asked for all indexed records, finding aids, their database. We used varying different terms. And so...
So let's say if you want cause of death, for example, pre-57, and they have that, I would assume, because they have 2 million death certificates that have, you get that?
So it's unlikely that pre-57 cause of death was indexed. These are generally on microfilm or microfiche. It kind of looks like a table, and normally it's just first name, last name, date of death.
So would you be entitled to have that if they have that information on 2 million various death certificates?
Yeah, so pre-57, certainly we would be entitled to it because anyone
So
can
they would have to
actually-
go through on microfiche every death certificate they have and put that information onto an index for you?
No, Your Honor, we're asking only for the indexes they have. They already have. So they're obligated by state statute.
Right.
to
So
have
didn't they
an
tell you
index.
that that's not on the index?
Sorry, say it
They
again?
said that they don't have that on the index, right?
If they don't have it, great. We're not debating that.
And that question hasn't been resolved yet?
Your Honor, it's baffling that after 4 years of this matter, the Department of Health has still never stated what records they have and what records they have for any specific period.
I thought there was testimony, I think it was from the 78, that there were pre-57 records, which I think go all the way back to 1880, that had not been indexed. And that, that was it was not a matter of dispute, but apparently it is.
So there's two separate categories of records here. There's the certificates, and then there's the indexes. We're not talking about certificates.
Right.
We're also not asking,
You can't have certificates, right?
well, they're actually public already.
Oh, okay.
So anything over 50 years old is already a public record. Anyone can get the entire certificate. You don't need to be related. You don't need to show any connection. It's anyone, whether it's a researcher or a news.
I'm just very unclear. I just need some real clarity here.
Sure.
There's a thing called the death index, correct?
There's no one thing, but yes, they have to index their records.
Are you saying there are multiple death indices?
Yeah, so,
Excuse me, and that is what you want, whatever these multiple death indices are?
correct.
Okay. Are the multiple death indices different from the death index that they make publicly available online?
Yes.
Okay. Are those death indices, I think I know where you're going with this, the way they have organized whatever were the records that they have archived?
So, the old way of doing it was they were microfilmed or microfiched.
Yes.
So, yes, they are archived, they're preserved. The
Yes.
Department of Health has them. And
What are,
in the-
I'm sorry, what are microfilmed or microfiched? The certificates or the indices?
Both of them separately, unrelated to each other.
So there are, on microfilm or microfiche, historical death indexes.
Correct.
Okay.
And
But
some of
these
them,
death indices, to be clear, are something different from a death certificate.
correct.
And
Okay,
something
so
different
the-
than a death record? Is there a
Yes.
death record? And that's different.
And
too.
I understand this is it is confusing, and the way the statute is written is also confusing.
Well, with all due respect, it's confusing because I don't understand what your request was. And I'm not sure the DOH is clear on what your request was, other than we want every record that you have. So you have to explain to me how it is you limited this request to other than, I want every record that you have.
So, Your Honor, when someone dies, a certificate is issued. Back in the
Yes.
day, pre-1900, let's say, it was in a register where it was a long ledger and it was filled in. That's the details, or a death certificate has a lot of information on it. It has your parents' names, it has date of death, cause of death, where you're buried, et cetera. The index is just a finding aid for the department. So if you need, now it's common for people who are trying to get dual citizenship for a country in Europe, for example, where they need documentation. Step one is, well, I have no idea where my grandfather died, when he died. The starting point is you start with the index. It's just like the index of a book or the catalog at the
And
library.
that is all that you want?
That's all we want.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, do they get to define what goes in the index?
So there's the pre-computerized indexes. So before computers, these are indexed on pieces of paper in a book. And the books were then scanned into microfilm. They have those. And it's in the record, actually. It's in Mr. Ferretti's affidavit where he attaches to it the actual catalog from the Department of Health, which says death indexes, the years, the cabinet drawer that these microfilms are in.
And if I go to the Department of Health, I can look at those?
Sorry, Your Honor?
If I go to the Department of Health, can I look at them?
No, because they don't let the public look at them.
Even for the very old ones that are on microfilm?
Correct. You have to order it, but
Oh,
anyone.
I'm sorry. You have to order it.
You can order the death certificate if it's over 50 years
I
old.
wasn't asking about the certificate, the index.
Indexes you can. They're the
And there is
death they hold.
more information on those microfiched indices than there is in the online one.
So the online one only is 57 to now 72.
Okay, but they gave you something pre-57.
Correct.
And how do you know that what's on that they gave you is not as complete as what is in the file drawer?
We don't in entirety because they've never said what they have. They've never shared what they have, and this is a perfect example where they say our only, quote, death index starts in 1957, but then at the same time produce to us an index pre-57.
Counsel,
So they're
but-
being very
You
inconsistent.
only want the index. Is that correct?
There's no one index, and the problem is, as the Department of Health.
Indices, excuse me. You only want the indices. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Can they decide what is the content of the indices?
Pre-computers,
Yes.
they're already printed. It's a book, like I was saying.
Okay.
So they can redact it if they want. If there's something that they don't like, if it had a cause of death, which I've seen indexes pre-72, they don't have cause of death on them. If there was another one that they had in their cabinets that did have cause of death, then if they view it as an invasion of privacy, they can redact it. That's it. But here, instead of redacting, which is what FOIL
Okay, you
requires.
keep telling me about There are things called indices, yes?
Yes,
Okay, that's what you asked for, yes?
yes,
Okay. You're saying they didn't give you all of those, correct?
correct.
I feel like I'm doing a cross-examination, but I need some clarity on this. So all you're going back to Judge Garcia's first question, all you're requesting now are those indices.
Yes.
However they've designed them, whatever information they have in them, that is what you want. Yes?
It's that simple, yes.
Okay.
Okay, let's go to the second group, 57 to 72.
Yes.
What are you still looking for in that?
Whatever else they've indexed. And how do we know there is something else? It's because in the record, you'll see in Mr. Ferretti's affidavit, he filed a FOIL request unrelated to this case. And they produced to him an index which had different fields than the index that they show online. They to him produced a field,
So you want whatever they have labeled an index.
all the fields.
You don't want the thing they've labeled the index that they're going to make public online. You want anything in-house that they have labeled an index.
Yeah, it's a pretty self-explanatory concept for departments of health.
No, I just, they got to go look for it. You want whatever they have labeled an index.
Yes, Your Honor.
You're not sure what's in this index?
We don't know which fields from certificates were indexed, but we know that there is a universe.
Want them because they are supposed to be an aid for a search. And you know they have, in your opinion, you gather it has more than what this public death index or index contains.
We know it does, because they've produced it elsewhere.
The example you just gave.
And is this something that you need in order to be able to find one of these, to get a certificate? Is this information that is necessary?
Yeah, so the reality is, the Department of Health is the sole holder of death certificates for all of New York except New York City. And if someone needs a certified record, they go to the Department of Health. Now, if you don't have access to the index, the Department of Health has to do its own search, and they charge you for it.
What is the basic information that you're looking for in terms of what information do you really need in order to be able to get that record?
Just the biographical information,
Just-
name, date of birth, date of death.
Is that your
and place.
client's purpose in this? Are they ultimately seeking certificates, or are they going to do what they do based on the information contained in the indexes?
So Reclaim the Records, it's a nonprofit, and their sole job is to help people locate records relating to their families or for any of these other purposes.
They're a
that we
nonprofit
discussed.
Because they don't need a certificate to do that, right? In other words, if you
organization-
got all the indexes or indices that you're looking for, it's not as if then you would start requesting certain
The
copies of death
organization won't be
certificates.
requesting them, but it's a
people who
public
use them.
service.
Yeah.
Essentially. It's providing the library catalog online to people.
And it's affiliated somehow with Ancestry.com? Reclaim the Records?
No, Your
Not at all?
No, they're an independent nonprofit, but
So-
if they
Right.
succeed in, so in these cases they have all over the country, when they successfully acquire records, they share it with organizations. One is called Family Search, which is a large organization where I mentioned I actually have looked at the New York State Index on Family Search because the ones that are older than 50 years old were shared with that organization.
And so to go back to the hypothetical you gave about somebody wanting to do genealogical research, and let's say it's for somebody who passed away in 1980, so it's not in the records that are available. There's no index available from which that person could themselves look
There is, so in New York,
in New York.
there is, they'll have access to the Social Security Death Master File, which is a federal index. So the federal index is public. It has over 100 million decedents' birth and death dates in it, and generally the place of residence, and it includes the Social Security number. So actually, Social Security numbers are public for anyone who has died, and you can request it yourself. So the problem there is just having that information doesn't help you get the original death record because you don't know necessarily where they died. In New York, it's done on a town basis.
So what I would then need to do is to go to the Department of Health, pay them something, $20?
I don't recall offhand what the
Some-
fee is, but it's an hourly,
Oh, it's an hourly rate for them to run the index?
they have a search for a certain number of hours that they'll use to search for the record. But if you take someone in New York who goes there and says, my grandfather's John Smith, he died in the 50s, I mean, good luck. And so the reality is this is why people need the index. It saves them money, it saves them time, and also the Department of Health has a backlog of thousands of records, and they just put it off and put it off. And so you have these people who need records for all sorts of reasons.
So for your purposes, the more different indexes you get, date of death, place of death, cause of death, the more helpful you can be to your users. Is that the
And
way
by
it works?
users, it's really just the public. It's a public service. These are just posted online. It's a database, and so it's a free.
But somebody has to go seek it out and use it. I mean, I've never heard of it before I got this case.
Right. So they're not posted on Reclaim the Records website, for example. They're posted on public providers.
So, for the 57 through 72 indices that you have or can get, public can get, does it have the certificate number on it?
Yes.
Isn't that really the search tool? I mean, I've never done this in the state, but in the city, you give them a certificate number, they give you a certificate. I mean, as long as it's the age. You know,
So,
it's 50 years.
The certificate number is very helpful, but again, let's use the example. If, we take someone on this court with a very common last name, we'll take Wilson. If you're looking for someone named James Wilson who died in Syracuse in the 50s, just having the
Then why would I need to know how James Wilson died?
how is not the focus.
So you're not seeking cause of death on anything?
Over 50 years ago, there's no restriction on it whatsoever. It's
So
not
for the
covered.
middle category, you are seeking cause of death index, or the last category?
If it exists,
You want it.
sure, but
But it doesn't help you find a record, right?
those are
Unless
for other
some reason you
purposes.
knew James Wilson died of a heart attack or something. I mean, what
Right,
is
so
it?
the other example is death certificates cost money to order. And so a lot of people don't want to have to expend the cost. It's $30 to order each record. So if you're looking for a common person, James Smith, and you don't know which one it is, then the person might have to expend several $100s just to try to
You're
get.
going to have James Smith on a date of death, right? So the only other thing I think that might help you is place, right?
Yes, Your Honor.
Of death.
Place is remarkably helpful, and that's something, it's mainly birthday, death date, place of birth, place of death are the most important, the
Right.
biographical information. There might be other fields indexed, but,
Is that on the online index?
Sorry, Your Honor?
Is that on the online index?
The online
Those-
index
those
does not
fields?
have, date of birth, place of birth, or place of death. It doesn't have any of those. It just has name, age, and a place of residence, which is not necessarily where someone died, and therefore not necessarily the town that
The
has.
essential one for your purposes is place of death?
Yes, Your Honor, because that's where the death certificate would be issued. And so this is a town-by-town, New York State does it by town. So it's either you can go to the Department of Health and you say, person died, I said Syracuse, but, if you
Do
think
you
they're
want
in a
medical information?
medical information, generally speaking, no.
Cause of death?
Cause of death is very valuable, and the main reason is family health history.
I'm sorry, I thought you said you didn't want the cause of death.
We don't want, about doctors or things like that. I don't think none of that is
That's
indexed.
not the cause of death. the
Cause of death
doctor's
is
name.
very beneficial for people.
Is it part of the request?
Yes.
Is this what you're saying you want?
Yes, to the extent it exists, yes. Again, the Department of Health here, instead of,
But exists on an indice,
if it did,
on
sure.
an index, excuse me.
Right, if it exists on any index, we don't know if it does.
It
because
seems though it's different. You first seem to be saying these indices are important and important to being public so people can go in, find the right record, and request a certificate. But now and that's why cause of death isn't particularly helpful to that function. But now you seem to be arguing that these substitute for the certificate. Because if I'm doing genealogical research, what do I need a certificate for? I can go into these things. So what is it you want? Do you want indices so people can get records, or do you want indices so people don't need to get records?
Any of it. And that's part of FOIL, is you don't have to state the rationale. And so Reclaim the Record's purpose is a broad, do-good purpose of help people for whatever reason it is. The amicus brief.
You could do a lot of things with this information without having to get certificates, right? One could, not you. If I want to do research on my, family medical history to see what diseases I might be susceptible to, and I had access to a database that showed me the cause of death of every ancestor I had, that would be valuable to me. Would you agree with that?
Of course it would be valuable, and.
If I wanted to price a life insurance policy for Judge Canataro, that might be useful to me, too.
It's funny, but it's serious, too. Wouldn't it be useful to other people?
Well, they would then have to hire a whole genealogy team. So assuming the life insurance company.
Some of them are pretty big, last I checked.
Again, if there's any worry about that, it's in the Department of Health's control to redact that field. That's step one for them. It's not to just say we're not going to give you anything.
So if they had a cogent reason why, say, cause of death might constitute a privacy interest, you would abide by that? Or you just say that's a different argument to have other than the one we're having now?
Fine, if that's what their response is. I mean, from day one, we're saying, we'd like to have what you have. And their response is, we don't have anything, but we've also given you everything we have.
But just a moment. It's not, we want to have what you have, because I started with that. You, I think, clarified that that's not what you're asking for. You're asking for these indices only.
We want what you have of the indices. Sorry, I didn't finish
So
that, yes.
because they obviously have death records, they have other materials that they
Yes.
draw from to create the index. Yeah, he's nodding yes, okay. But you're not asking for those things.
No.
No, just the index, however they have designated this index, whatever they have chosen to put in the index, that is all you want.
That is all we want. And not only that,
Okay.
these are generally public in other states. So that,
Is there an index for the third period, 72 to 2017?
is there a what, sorry?
An index?
Is there an index? Our understanding is that they have these more so computerized. So yes, there is an index. There was, in the 70s and 80s and 90s, it's the same kind of paper index that was then microfilmed, which is in their cabinet drawers, which we know they have. But today, how it's done is, generally speaking, if someone dies at a hospital, it's input into a computer system, and then it's a spreadsheet. They can choose which columns to export. So that's the whole regime, is it
So-
used to be paper,
So
now it's
if,
digital.
if the categories you desperately would like to see are not on any of these indices, you're not asking them to add it on and create something new, correct?
Your Honor.
Or at least
We-
you're
we are
starting
not-
here. Give me the indices, and then maybe you'll have another FOIL request after.
Correct, Your Honor. We just want what has already been made. We're not asking for anything new, and because New York law has always mandated the creation of an index for the Department of Health, we know they have it. And we also know they have it from the produced records from.
Yes, but they could have one that they consider the index that the statute mandates, and yet you are saying, but you have many others, and we want all of those.
In the record, and I can tell you the page, it's on 191 to 193, it's the spreadsheet from the Department of Health where they call them indexes, and they identify, is it in paper, is it in microfilm, or is it in microfiche, and what cabinet drawer is it in? So that's why. We're not creating ideas here. We're using their own catalog.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, good afternoon, Your Honors. Kevin Hu on behalf of the Department of Health. So I would like to start with this issue of what exactly is in the department's possession, because quite frankly, I'm a little bit confused and concerned at this point. So,
That
So
does not
public-
bode well for me, I'll tell you.
I know, Your Honor, I've been sitting here panicking. So Public Health Law 4100, requires the department to serve as the sole custodian for all death records, which is a general term that includes death certificates, from all localities except for the city of New York. That provision further requires the Department of Health to then create an index. But the sole substantive requirement that it imposes on the department is to list the decedents by name. So, Judge Rivera, you were asking who has the discretion to decide what substantive categories of information go into the index? It is necessarily the Department of Health. And here, the department has exercised that discretion to limit the information for each decedent to 7 particular categories. And you can see those 7 on the published death index that is available on its website. It is first name, middle initial, last name, age, gender, and a residency code, and I might be missing one.
But you do have other things that are indices, even if you don't consider that. I
Yes.
understand your point here.
Yes.
As that death index that the statute requires. Am I
That's
getting
right,
that
Your Honor. The department has always acknowledged that it has additional information it could add to the death index. It has further recognized that it has additional documents that it has labeled an index. But the FOIL request was keyed to the New York State Death Index and expressly referred to what is available online.
Why isn't that argument semantic? All the information is being collected, I would assume, from the same source, whether it's the certificate or some other informational source. So some of it's being called death index because it falls within those 7 categories, 1 statutorily required category, and I assume 6 discretionary categories that have been designated death indexes, and the others haven't, but that's just because somebody at DOH says so. So I'm not sure I understand how you can, how you can make the argument that that's not part of the death index.
Certainly, Your Honor. So perhaps we could take a step back a moment. So how the department has chosen to store the death certificates has changed over time. From 1988 through 2005, there were copies of each particular death certificate stored on microfiche. But then as technology advanced, the department has also turned to electronic storage formats. And so for 1957 to the present, every time it receives a particular record, it scans and basically extracts all of the data points from those records into a database. And from that database, it can then pick which particular fields it wants to produce for any given purpose.
So you can index it any way you want.
That is correct, Your Honor. And so the department has always recognized that it has additional categories of data that it could add to the 7, but the statute only requires the department to list these, the decedents by
Let's
last name.
assume for one moment that the request is the thing you all call the death index, as well as any other index. What's the grounds for not giving them all the other indices?
Your Honor, unfortunately, I can't give you a definitive answer because it is not clear to me that the department understood the FOIL request to be so broad. But at least some of the examples that petitioner gave, so for example, one of the indexes just relates to the physical location of where the underlying death certificate is. Another one relates to an initiative the department had to digitize these certificates to begin with, and it tracked those progress. And given how the FOIL request expressly referred to what is available online and seemed like the more relevant genealogical information, the department just simply did not think that's what petitioner actually cared about.
Can I just
But I
back up?
think
Oh,
I'm sorry,
Go
for
ahead.
the 1957 to 1970, they asked for all available data fields, not merely the fields shown publicly online. I think they were pretty clear about that.
That's correct, Your Honor, and that perhaps gets to an issue with the scope of petitioner FOIL request. So if you take it at its broadest interpretation, it's not just asking for the state death index, also any additional data fields, as Your Honor just pointed out. But then in responding to the department's privacy-based concerns, suddenly petitioner retreats to a much more restrictive interpretation of what they're actually seeking.
I just wanted to understand a prior answer you gave. So it maybe I misunderstood, but it sounded to me as if what you have, 57 forward, is a database. And the database is built by essentially a scanning and automatic extraction of all the data that is on death certificates into a database. One would typically not call a database an index, but from a database you could ask for a report to be run, and a report that is produced could be, wouldn't have to be, but could be an index. And you use that database to create what you call the death index. Everything so far sound right?
Yes, I agree with you, Your
Okay,
Honor.
and from time to time, for the department's own purposes, you query the database and ask for a report, and the report could be something that you might call an index depending on what the search terms were used and what you wanted reported, or it might be something you wouldn't actually call an index, but a different kind of report. Is that all fair?
Yes, that's correct, Your Honor. And so the affidavit of the Bureau of Vital Records, the director of the Bureau of Vital Records explained that most of the queries that the department does run are for administrative purposes.
And some of those queries produce something you could call an index, and some produce results that are not really an index?
That's correct, Your Honor. And so as petitioners pointed out, there are many things that the department has created and labeled an index. But ultimately, the department, based on the language in the FOIL request, understood petitioner to be seeking something quite different.
What? How do you understand his request?
So the FOIL request specifically asked for the New York State Death Index, with each word capitalized, and it made reference to what the Department of Health currently has available on its website. And so we understood the FOIL request to be seeking basically two things. First, additional years excuse me, Your Honors, that state death index currently only covers the years 1957 through 1972. So the department understood the petitioner's request to be along two forms. First, to add additional years to that index, and secondly, for each year to add additional categories of data beyond the 7 that the department has chosen.
And just so I put a pin in this, you haven't yet queried the database to produce the death index, for example, for 2010.
That is correct, Your Honor. So
You could do that.
we could do, the
But you
department
haven't done
certainly
it
could,
yet.
but has not done yet because of privacy-based concerns as well as Title 35.5.
Just to put one more pin in that, with respect to the pre-57 records, is it your position that you've now disclosed what you call the New York State Death Index for pre-57 records? Because clearly those are not available on the website.
That is correct, Your Honor. So I was under the impression that that time period was no longer in dispute because after the administrative appeal in this matter, the department produced what's called a comma-separated value file covering the years 1856 through 1956.
I saw that.
And the substance of that file is very similar to the New York State Death Index as we know it for the subsequent
So your
years.
position is, or at least you think, that producing the CSV file satisfied the request for pre-57 death index information?
Exactly right.
There should be
Your
no dispute in this court over that.
Honor. That's exactly right. That is certainly the,
So how did you get the data that you used to create the CSV file pre-57?
I believe it was actually a process of looking at each death record that was in the microfiche. And so obviously it was a very time-intensive process.
You did it for this purpose specifically?
I
Or
believe
it existed because it had been done?
I believe it already existed,
My
and
thought.
that's why we see the cutoff is 1956.
That was
which
my
then
understanding.
Suddenly, the department
Okay,
changed.
can I ask, when you said that your understanding of the request is that they wanted more years beyond the 57 to 72, and your understanding now is also that pre-57, you gave them everything that they requested, but on the post-72, they want more years. But then you said, and DOH understood that they wanted more categories. What are these additional categories? As DOH understood it, based on the request.
So, to be frank, Your Honor, DOH had no idea which particular categories that petitioner was seeking. And so out of an abundance of caution, it interpreted the request to potentially cover all of them because every data point within a death record is now available on the database. To give the FOIL request its broadest interpretation, it would cover the entirety of that database. And so that potential scope formed the basis of the particular privacy-based
Yeah, I have a question about the privacy-based exemption, because it's hard without context, without knowing what's actually in those records to make a decision about whether those exemptions should apply or not. So for example, in a cause of death, someone might kill themselves by taking pills, but their cause of death might be cardiac arrest because their heart stopped. What's on that? Like, I have no idea what it would be. So if it was suicide, then I would say, yes, that would be a privacy concern. If it's not, we have no information about what it is that is on there for cause of death. Can you help us out?
Your Honor, so based on based on conversations with my client, and so this isn't necessarily reflected in the record, for cause of death, that field more often than not will mimic what you would find on a long-form coroner's report. And so the amount of detail is that it could potentially be substantial. On page 121 of the record, in the BVR director's affidavit, she sets forth what the department considers to be sensitive categories of information, such that the mere disclosure would necessarily intrude on the privacy of a deceased individual. And this court has recognized that even the deceased do have a privacy interest in their private affairs, which flows to their survivors.
There was not an in-camera review of records. Is that correct?
That is correct, Your Honor. The department has never shown the entirety of its database to a judicial fact finder.
But merely, as you say, assumed that it's all these other categories, and then made its arguments regarding either the unwarranted invasion of privacy and/or the statutory argument.
That's correct, Your Honor. And
Right.
it's worth mentioning that there are two distinct privacy interests that the department is concerned with. So the first relates to a subset. So certain sensitive categories of information, such as cause of death, pregnancy status, whether the death was a result of a homicide, accident, or suicide. So the disclosure of those categories would necessarily violate someone's personal privacy. But the second privacy interest is in how the disclosure of even basic biographical details might be misused. And so essentially the department is saying that all of this data, even the 7 categories for this most recent 50 years, would violate personal privacy because it would create an unwarranted risk that this information could be used to perpetrate identity
But
theft.
year 49, it doesn't. Or year 51, excuse me, I went in the wrong direction. It doesn't.
That is correct, Your Honor, and the department believes that's consistent with this court's precedent. In matter of Harbacken, this court seemed to recognize that 50 years is a cutoff in which privacy interests might be extinguished, and the department also relied on a concurrent 50-year period in which federal law, namely HIPAA, finds a privacy interest in certain health information.
Counsel, could we go back to pre-57? And
Yes.
now you have said that in the course of this litigation, you've turned over this additional CSV or
Yes.
whatever information which you thought ended the dispute pre-57. Your opposing counsel has made the point that there are these other indices, but having turned over this additional information, is it possible that these other indices contain any other information in addition to what's in this supplemental discovery you made or production? So you turned over this CSV file. Could there be indices, existing indices, that they now say they're looking for, and I understand there's a dispute over that, but is it possible that there are fields on that that have not been turned over in this latest production you've made?
I cannot provide the court with a definitive answer on that, and that's certainly something that I could discuss with co-counsel afterwards.
Do you know whether the data was put into the CSV, into the database at least, from which you could extract the CSV information for the purpose, for the period before 1957, of replicating the fields that are publicly available in the death index?
It is my understanding that the CSV file data has not been put into the current database that covers 1957.
No, I guess I was trying to ask something different.
Oh,
So
I apologize.
the records before 1957 were all on microfilm or microfiche. They were not initially entered into a computer or anything like that. And as I think you said, it was a laborious process for some people to look at these microfilm, microfiche records and, I assume, manually enter the data into something, because a CSV field is a digital field, right? It's numbers separated by commas.
Yes, that is correct.
So they probably didn't just type numbers and commas. They probably put it into something, a database of some sort. And my question is, my assumption is they were doing that for the purpose of taking some of the information, or maybe all the information that was in those certificates, and putting them into some format where you could then extract the CSV files. Do you know if the purpose they were doing that, so when they were looking at these records and extracting information, were they limiting the information they were extracting to the fields that you now find in the death index, so they could have a replication of those fields from the pre-57 period, or were they trying to extract additional information as well?
Your Honor, unfortunately, I don't know, because I didn't realize this time period
Yeah.
was ultimately at issue in this proceeding. So I see that my time is up, so if I could just make one comment in closing. So the department respectfully requests that this court affirm the third department, dismiss the petition, but in the event that this court does not, we ask that this court provide guidance on two grounds. First, clarify which additional years the department must add to the death index, and second, what additional categories of information, if any, the department must supplement the health index with. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to clarify a few of the questions that were raised. In terms of what the department has done in terms of the CSV file you mentioned, they've contracted with private companies to do this. It's a government contract that they get to index the files. And so this has been done in New York, it's done all over the country. So it's not necessarily a laborious process where the agency is taking all this time to do it. These are government contracts, it's a third party. They copy the indexes into spreadsheets, and then the agency has now a spreadsheet that they can filter and sort instead of having to go to the drawers and find these old.
Yeah, my question wasn't really who did it. My question is whether whether the extraction of the information from the pre-57 records, which was done manually, extracted all the information or some of the information? And the answer is he doesn't know, and I assume you don't know either.
I do know. They just extracted, they copied the indexes into computers, and what these indexes had was just basic fields. So the pre-72, let's say, fields, pre-57.
Pre-57.
Yeah, these are very basic tabular sheets. You can find them online.
So is it the same indices as what's in the online version of 57 to 72? Or is it more than that?
It's similar. So a lot of them will have the residence code, the code for the town of death. That's not in the online one, which is something we're really looking for. So they use codes.
So there is more. So
Yes.
I think the answer to the chief's question is you believe, or you know,
Yeah.
that there is more information in what was extracted for pre-57 records than what has been turned over thus far.
And post-57.
Wait, maybe one of us misunderstood the answer, I think. So for the pre-57, do you think that the CSV files you got include all the information that was on those microfilm records?
It's likely what was on one of these forms of indexes they looked at. Unfortunately, what has happened is DOH has created numerous indexes over the years. It might have been what's on one, it might not have been what's on another. And so the page I mentioned earlier, 190, I believe it was 191, yeah, 191 is a spreadsheet of the various indexes they have. They have indexes that go from varying different age ranges, year ranges that overlap each other.
Counsel, when your adversary left the podium, he said, if you don't affirm the appellate division, then please tell us what time periods we still have to disclose, and far more frighteningly, he said, tell us what categories of information we need to disclose.
Yeah.
And your presentation, since you came back, that doesn't clarify anything about what categories are missing. So can you just tell us, let me ask you simply, what categories of information do you not have from pre-57 that you know that they do have and that you want?
Pre-57, I don't know offhand if there is anything else because I've never seen the indexes.
So can we call it a day on pre-57? Because we don't know. I promise you, we don't know.
But we don't aver that it's your responsibility to make that decision. It's the trial court or the appellate division, none of whom did an in-camera review. That's step one here is no one knows what they have. Why are they taking their word?
So is that what's missing, that there should have been an in-camera review of every one of their indices?
Or
Not the death index, not what you've gotten, I'm not talking about that.
Or at least a meet and confer.
These other indices. Because you're saying, all I want is the indices, you didn't want anything else, we're
Yeah.
staying with that.
Yes, Your Honor, and that's what's the precedent in this state.
So,
from
but,
data
so
tree-
is that the step perhaps might be helpful here all the way around? If there was an in-camera, in case they don't want to produce the indices for you to view, to show to the judge and let the judge make a preliminary decision about whether or not the indices and any additional information should be released.
Yes, Your Honor, I think step one here, a very reasonable approach would be,
Did you ever ask for that?
well, there was no hearing at the trial level, and
Okay.
on appeal, the two judges in dissent suggested an in-camera review.
An in-camera review.
And so, and as I mentioned, I would have loved to have a meet and confer over the past 4 years, but it never happened. And so we would love to just know what's the universe so we can reasonably discuss it. And we're not asking for everything under the sun.
Well, let's just, because we never really got to their other arguments. So let's go with the most recent 50 years. They do not want to give anything from that period because they claim it's an unwarranted invasion of privacy or otherwise violates the statute. Can you address why there's not fraud issues that perhaps are relevant here or identity theft issues? I mean,
Yes, Your Honor.
you know, it sounds rational to say I don't want to give up all this information because identity theft and fraud is rampant. Why aren't they right about that?
Right. So it might be true that identity theft is an issue, but they've provided no evidence, and the burden's on them under FOIL to show how can access to a death index possibly lead to identity theft. We're talking about people who are deceased, some of whom up to 50 years ago. If you know when someone died 50 years ago, if you walk into a cemetery and read a tombstone, do you now have the ability to commit identity theft?
I think there's some pretty good evidence that people in the 1960 presidential election who were dead voted in Chicago.
I recently heard that Social Security is paying out to 250-year-old people. I mean,
So-
maybe this information can be used nefariously.
So to both of those.
And they say, of course, you can come up with sort of piecemeal use of identity, right?
So-
Different fields of identity from different individuals to try and use that for fraudulent purposes.
So-
Why aren't they right about that?
Something that we mentioned in our most recent brief is actually the Department of the Treasury recently said that having access to a death index helped them prevent fraud and recover funds. And because it's using the death index, you can check if someone.
But counsel, that depends on who's using it for what purpose. I mean, it's great that Treasury found a fraud-reducing use for it, but there could be someone out there who's using it to commit fraud, couldn't there?
Well, we should look at the landscape of the country, which is, this is already, the federal death index, the Social Security death index, goes up to the present. And you have death indexes public in all of our neighboring states, and there's not a single reported use from the department of anyone having committed fraud using a death index. And so the burden falls on them. It's not on Reclaim the Record's part to have to find evidences of fraud. They have the burden, and they've shown 0 instances. And so if we look, if New Jersey has it public, if Connecticut has it public, if Massachusetts has it public, which they all do, and no one says there's any fraud, and you can go on the Social Security death index and find your grandmother in there with her birthday, last date, and Social Security number, all public, and no one's claiming fraud, then why are we just taking the word of the employee of the Department of Health on their own behalf? So they're using their own statement without any expertise, without any factual evidence, and just claiming you can't have anything because we think there might be fraud.
What about the unwarranted invasion of privacy?
So the case law upon which they rely, New York Times, is probably the most unique fact pattern you can come up with the 9/11 calls, 911 calls on 9/11. And that's not precedent that should apply to every FOIL case involving privacy. That, this court said in that case, it's an extremely unique fact pattern involving the most egregious forms of
Well, the test is a
communication.
balancing test. right?
Sorry, Your Honor?
It's a balancing test. You don't disagree with that.
Correct, it's a balancing test.
All right,
And so
so why does it balance in favor of your request, whatever that request may be?
It's because, so if you look at Harbotkin, for example, they talk there about even private matters fade with time. So it's a scale. So something that's private yesterday, and so they mention obituaries in their brief, that's from yesterday. But if someone died 45 years ago, why are we to apply the same restrictive reading as we do to the 911 calls of people in the towers? And so it is a scale between those types of privacy invasions. Is just having a name and a date of birth and a date of death on a piece of paper invading someone's privacy? Like I said, you can go to a cemetery and see the same information,
Except you want many more fields than that.
but that goes to the question of redaction. that doesn't go to the question of withholding. That's a separate consideration. Their obligation is to produce, and if they don't produce, they can redact what they view as private. Instead, they just said, it's all private, we're throwing our hands up and giving you nothing. Versus, on the other hand, the public interest, it's not just genealogists, it's also, one of the amicus briefs was about circuits court, how if someone dies intestate, you need to prove the whole family structure. There's many other examples here where it comes into play. I know I'm well over my time, so I thank you all for your questions.
Thank you.